HOA stormed my house after move-in, demanding my yard, didn't know I owned their streets. HOA called cops over my American flag dock, not knowing it was for Independence Day. They came with flashing lights. The knock echoed through my house before sunrise. 2 officers stood at my door, and right behind them, the HOA president with that smile that never reached her eyes. They said I had broken the rules, but what they didn't know was that I held a secret powerful enough to turn everything against them. The knock on my door still echoes in my mind. It was so early. Just after sunrise, the lake outside was calm. The air was cold. I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone who needed help. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a friendly face. 2 police officers stood there, tall, serious, and right behind them. The HOA president, her smile was tight, but her eyes burned with something darker. She didn't even wait for the cops to speak. She pushed forward, pointing at me, at my dock, at the flag. "He's breaking the rules," she said. Her voice cracked like glass, sharp and bitter. The officers glanced at me, then at her. It felt strange, seeing the law standing beside pettiness, the kind of pettiness that hides in quiet neighborhoods, the kind that grows behind white fences and manicured lawns. I tried to stay calm, but my heart raced, because I already knew what this was about. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about law. It was about control. That morning, my American flag waved proudly over my dock, big, bold, red, white, and blue. It was Independence Day weekend, a holiday about freedom, about sacrifice, about pride. But to her, it was an enemy. To the HOA, it was a violation, a symbol that they couldn't bend to their rules, and she hated it. The officers asked questions. "Did you put this up recently? Did you have permission from the HOA board?" Every word felt heavy, like I was on trial in my own home. I told them calmly, "It was my dock. I had built it years ago, legally, with permits from the city." I told them the flag was not permanent, only for the holiday, but my words seemed to bounce off their silence. Meanwhile, she stood behind them, arms crossed, lips curled into a smile, the kind of smile that says, "I've already won." She wanted me humiliated in front of everyone. She wanted me crushed. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about a flag. Not really. This was about power. Her power over this neighborhood, over every little rule, over every person who dared to stand tall. I looked past the officers, and I could see my neighbors watching, curtains shifting, eyes peeking from windows, whispers floating on the air. The whole street was awake now, and I was the show. The officers said they had to file a report, standard procedure, nothing serious, they claimed. But I knew how this game worked. A report today, fines tomorrow, harassment forever. The HOA president thrived on it. She built her kingdom not with kindness, but with control, and I had become her enemy, all because of a flag. My kids stood behind me in the hallway, confused. "Dad, why are the police here?" they whispered. How could I explain to them that grown adults in power could act so small, that a piece of cloth waving in the wind could bring this much hate? The officers finished their questions and walked back to their car, but she didn't leave. She leaned closer, her voice low. "You think you're clever," she said, "but we own this neighborhood, and soon, you'll regret this." And with that, she walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement, her shadow long, sharp, cutting across the morning sun. I stood there, frozen. Neighbors still watched, my kids still stared, and the flag still waved proudly in the breeze, untouched. It was in that moment I realized this fight was just beginning. The cops were only the first move. The HOA would not stop, and my dock, my flag, my freedom was the battlefield. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't powerless. I had something she couldn't see, something she couldn't control, and when the time came, it would turn her world upside down, because this wasn't just about rules. This wasn't just about a dock. This was about freedom versus control. And freedom doesn't bow easily. Now tell me, if the HOA came knocking at your door, with cops at their side, over something as simple as an American flag, what would you do? The lake was quiet that evening, but the silence felt heavy. Every ripple of water seemed to carry whispers. Every shadow from the houses felt like eyes watching me. Our neighborhood always looked perfect. lawns trimmed like green carpets, driveways shining like glass. But beneath the perfect picture, there was tension, rules written in thick handbooks, meetings where whispers became warnings. The HOA wasn't just an association, it was a machine. And the president, she was the one pulling every lever. People feared her more than they respected her. I had seen it myself. A neighbor fined for planting roses instead of tulips. Another warned for a garden gnome too close to the walkway. And the worst, an elderly man forced to repaint his entire fence because the shade of white was too creamy. It sounded ridiculous, but here, the ridiculous was law, and if you dared to resist, you became the enemy. That night I sat on my dock, the flag still moving in the breeze. I watched the water, the lights across the lake, but I could feel the weight of her eyes somewhere in the dark. She had made her move this morning, calling the cops, and I knew she wasn't finished. The funny part is, most neighbors didn't even like her, but they feared her fines. They feared her. Notes: they feared the embarrassment of being called out, so they played along. They smiled at her in the day and cursed her name at night. I wasn't like them. I wasn't going to bow. Not for my dock, not for my flag, because this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about freedom in my own home. The irony made me laugh. The 4th of July was around the corner, the day when Americans celebrate freedom, and here I was, in a quiet suburban street, fighting for the same thing against people who lived right next to me. I leaned back on the wooden planks of the dock, staring at the sky. The stars looked calm, but I wasn't calm inside. Every beat of my heart was a warning. She would strike again, and harder. But the question was, how do you fight someone who hides behind rules, behind power, behind smiling threats? Tell me, if your neighbor turned the rules of your own community into a weapon against you, would you fight back, or would you bend? The first letter came the very next day. A plain white envelope, slid under my door before sunrise. No knock this time. No police, just paper. Cold and sharp. Inside, a violation notice. Unauthorized structure on common property. $50 fine. Due immediately. And at the bottom, her signature, perfect cursive. Like poison written in ink, I crumpled it in my fist. Because I knew the truth. That dock was mine. Approved years ago. Built with my own hands. I had the papers. I had the permits. But the HOA didn't care about truth. They cared about obedience. I tore the letter, threw it aside. But before I could breathe, another came, and another. Every morning, a new envelope, a new fine. The numbers stacking like bricks in a wall meant to crush me. Neighbors whispered again. Some told me to give up, pay the fines, take the flag down. It's not worth the fig. Wait, they said, but when I looked at them, I saw fear, not advice. Fear, and fear is exactly what she wanted. To her, every broken neighbor was another trophy, and she wanted me broken too. I walked down to the dock that night. The flag still waved strong in the dark sky. It wasn't just cloth anymore. It was defiance. It was me saying, I will not bow. And maybe that's why it burned her so much, because for the first time, she couldn't control the narrative. She couldn't erase the symbol, and she couldn't erase me. But as I stood there by the water, I wondered, how far would she go? Would fines be enough for her, or would she try something darker? Something that would shake the whole neighborhood? So tell me, if you knew your enemy wouldn't stop until you surrendered, would you keep standing, or would you finally break? The threats didn't stay on paper for long. Soon they arrived in whispers, in meetings, in notes slipped onto my car windshield at night. You are destroying the beauty of this community. People like you don't belong here. Every word dripped with venom, but every word carried her fingerprints. At first I ignored it, but then the fines grew larger. $100, $200, $300 for the flag, for the dock, for daring to breathe outside of her rules. And then came the meeting. The HOA gathered in the clubhouse, the perfect little building with white walls and fake smiles. She stood at the front, dressed sharp, her voice calm, but her eyes searched for me like a hawk searching for prey. She spoke of unity, of rules, of keeping order, but every sentence circled back to me. She called me a disruption, a danger to harmony. And all around me, neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some nodded along, afraid, some looked down, ashamed, and a few just stared at me with pity. I sat there silent. Because sometimes silence is louder than words, and in that silence, I saw her grow angry. She wanted me to fight, to lash out, to give her the chance to crush me in front of everyone. But I didn't give her that, so she made her next move. A letter arrived the next morning. Not a fine this time, a threat of legal action. If I didn't remove the flag within 72 hours, they would take me to court. I held that letter in my hands. And for the first time, I felt the weight of her power. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. She was dragging me into a war I hadn't asked for, a war she thought I couldn't win. But the truth was, I had something she didn't know about, a piece of information, a card I hadn't played yet. And when the time came, it would flip her entire game upside down. But before that moment arrived, I had to survive her storm, and the storm was only just beginning. So tell me, if the law itself was twisted into a weapon against you, would you fight back in court? Or would you surrender to protect your peace? The day of the deadline came fast. 72 hours, gone like smoke in the wind. I half expected them to show up with trucks, to rip the dock apart, to tear the flag down, but instead, she arrived with the police again. 2 officers walked across my lawn, slow, deliberate. Behind them, the president standing tall, her lips curled into that familiar smile. Neighbors lined the street, watching, whispering. She wanted this moment to be a show. She wanted me humiliated in front of everyone. One officer stepped forward. "Sir, we've been told this dock is unauthorized, and the flag violates HOA restrictions." His tone was professional, but I could hear doubt in his voice. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. Instead, I walked back inside my house, and when I returned, I carried a thick folder in my hands. Every page, every permit, every approval from the city, stamped, signed, official. The dock was mine, the right to raise the flag. Mine too, and not Jew. As that, the dock wasn't built on HOA property at all. It was built on land legally registered under my name. Years before she even moved into the neighborhood, I placed the documents in the officer's hands. His eyes scanned the pages, and then, slowly, his brows lifted. He turned to her. "Ma'am, this is valid." For the first time, her smile cracked. The power in her voice wavered. "This can't be right," she muttered. But it was right. It was more than right. It was undeniable. The officers handed the papers back to me. Then one of them turned to her. "Ma'am, if you continue filing false complaints, this may be considered harassment." Her face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that silence, the neighborhood shifted. I saw neighbors smile for the first time. I heard whispers of laughter ripple through the crowd. The queen of rules, the master of control, had been cornered by the very laws she worshipped. I stood there calm, flag still waving proudly behind me. For the first time in weeks, the power wasn't in her hands, it was in mine. But even as she turned and walked away, her heels clicking with anger, I knew this war wasn't over. People like her don't surrender easily. They retreat, they plot, they wait for the next strike. And that thought made me wonder, what kind of revenge do people like her plan when their pride has been shattered in front of everyone? So tell me, if your enemy lost publicly but still had power in the shadows, would you let your guard down? Or would you prepare for the storm to return? The night after her defeat was different. The air felt lighter, the lake calmer. For the first time in weeks, I slept without that knot in my chest. But peace never lasts long in a place like this, because pride wounded in public always returns sharper in private. The very next day, I found another note. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, shaky but angry. "Enjoy your little victory, it won't last." No signature. But I didn't need one. The handwriting was familiar. Sharp strokes of a woman who always pressed too hard with her pen. I looked around. The street felt the same. Kids rode bikes. Sprinklers sprayed water across green lawns, but now every smile felt forced. Every glance felt like a warning, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. That evening, I went to the clubhouse for the monthly meeting. I didn't want to, but I had to. I needed to see her face again. I needed to know what she was planning. The room buzzed with small talk when I walked in, but the moment I stepped through the door, silence. Dozens of eyes turned to me, some curious, some supportive, some filled with quiet fear, and then she entered, head held high, as if nothing had happened. Her smile was back, but this time it trembled at the edges. She sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, and with one sharp strike, the meeting began. Her voice was steady as she spoke, but underneath it, I could hear the cracks. She talked of new rules, stricter guidelines, tighter control. It was her way of clawing back power. She couldn't win against me openly, so she would suffocate everyone slowly. I sat there, fists clenched under the table, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor too afraid to speak, every family who bent their backs just to avoid her wrath. The irony burned inside me. The flag on my dock stood for freedom, but here we were, prisoners in our own homes, chained not by law but by fear. And I realized then, this was bigger than my fight. This was about all of us, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for someone to finally stand up and break her crown for good. But standing up has a cost, because when you fight someone who has nothing left to lose, they become dangerous. So tell me, if you had the chance to rally your neighbors and finally topple someone like her, would you take the risk, or would you stay silent to protect yourself? The night I made my choice, I didn't whisper it to anyone. I didn't announce it with fireworks. I simply knocked on my neighbor's door, then another, and another, one by one. I told them what had happened. I showed them the notes. I showed them the flag on my dock, still standing tall, and slowly, almost cautiously, they nodded, because deep down, they were tired too. Tired of paying fines for grass growing too long, tired of measuring mailboxes with rulers, tired of being afraid of one woman who thought she was queen. By the end of the week, we were united. The very people she thought were too weak to resist were now standing shoulder to shoulder, and when the next HOA meeting came, we filled the room, not with silence, but with voices. She tried to gavel us down. She tried to threaten, to shout, but this time, she had no power, because power only lives where fear exists, and the fear was gone. A vote was called, and with trembling hands, she watched as every hand but hers went up. Just like that, her reign ended. The same room where she had ruled for years became the place of her downfall. When I walked out that night, the air felt different again, not heavy, not tense, but free. The flag on my dock waved gently, not as a challenge, but as a reminder. Freedom is never given by people like her. It is taken back by people like us. And sometimes, the loudest victory doesn't come with shouting. It comes with silence, with neighbors nodding at each other, with a smile that says, "We are finally free." But here's the thing. HOAs exist everywhere, in small towns, suburbs, gated communities. So I have to ask you, if your HOA tried to crush your freedom like this, would you fight back like we did, or would you surrender to keep the peace?